What's up, YouTube? So today I want to talk about a couple of tricks to unlock your creativity. So this video is kind of loosely inspired by a video I saw on Alchemy Neuro's channel not so long ago. I'll post a link to that in the description, but it's also something that, some sort of ideas that I've been preaching for a little while and a discussion that came up in a recent live stream. So I wanted to kind of put all these ideas into a video just to make it more accessible for everybody. So I'm sure you're familiar with the concept of writer's block or creative block or beat block, whatever you want to call it. It's the idea of being creatively stuck, having a project that maybe you're halfway through or that you haven't even started with, and you're just staring at a blank DAW or just letting it loop over and over, and you can't think of any creative ideas to add to the project. So Alchemy's video was great in terms of the sort of attitude and mindsets that will help you to be more creative, I guess. But in this video, I want to talk a little bit more about some kind of tricks, like some more practical things that have helped me. So the first thing I want to talk about is the fact that the brain is like a muscle. And much like any muscles, if you want them to perform their best, they do need to be exercised. So I definitely suggest the idea of training. Training your creativity, training your brain, much like you would training a muscle if you're wanting to get more swole, right? So there's various ways of training your creativity. I guess the best and most easiest for you folks to adopt would be to make little challenges for yourself, whether it's a time challenge. For example, say, okay, I've got an hour, make as much of a track as possible within that hour. Or limiting yourself to just specific instruments. So one thing that's actually truly powerful that I definitely suggest is just limiting yourself to like just a piano and just drums, or just drums and just a guitar, or something like that. And what ends up happening is you end up making all of your creative decisions within the boundaries of those instruments. So for example, within electronic music, we often use stuff like risers, right? And if we're limited to just a drum kit and a piano, how would we go about making a riser? There would be various ways. We could kind of do a thing where we kind of play the keys up like that, or we could record one note in on the piano and reverse it. And, there's various creative decisions we can make there. In doing that, in kind of setting those limitations and trying out all those creative decisions that you can do within the boundaries of those limitations, you end up finding new ways of doing things, right? Whether those become part of your actual workflow or not, that'll be up to you, but you'll only really know once you've found those ideas, right? It's impossible to know what your workflow is if you haven't discovered anything yet. Do you know what I mean? So I want to show you a quick example, actually, of a track that was spawned because of challenging myself to using just a piano and drums. Of course, I elaborated on that. Once I was outside of the concept of that challenge, I was like, okay, this is really cool. I could turn this into a full track. And that's the key to take away here. It's not just to make a track that you're going to release every day. It's to practice and practice and practice. And when you stumble on those really good ideas, capitalize on that moment of creativity. Use that one example to build on and maybe draw inspiration from some of the other challenges that you've done, right? So in this challenge, I basically told myself I'm limited to just piano and drums, but this is what came of that. It's something that I guess compositionally I thought I wasn't capable of before, this kind of level of expression on the keys, but it happened as a result of me setting those limitations and challenging myself. cool, hey? So obviously, like, if you know my music, you know this is completely outside of my wheelhouse. You know, I'm not used to making stuff with like different grooves and such melodic kind of focus and stuff. And the key to that was just challenge myself, you know, set that limitation, capitalize on that idea that is created within that session, right? Okay, so the type of challenges that you could set for yourself would be time challenges, you know, 30 minutes or an hour to make a beat. Instrument challenges, so like limiting yourself to just drums, just keys, or both, or just drums and a string instrument or something like that. Also, genre challenges are really good. So, for example, if you don't make dubstep or if you don't make psytrance, try to make it. But don't follow tutorials. You know, just try to see if you can come up with those things. Because maybe you will discover some kind of sound design technique that you could use for the genre that you actually make. And it could spawn some kind of whole new thing, right? So try something new without following along somewhere, because maybe the end result won't be exactly like a professional dubstep track or whatever the case is. But you may discover these things, right? And I guess that's the most important thing, is like stretching the brain to be able to make discoveries quicker, right? And in that way, you actually, I'm not a scientist, so I don't quite fully understand it. But the way the brain works is it kind of like builds these pathways, right? And as you learn more and as you do more research, your brain is building more pathways to these different kind of destinations, right? And the more you practice things, the sort of more efficient those pathways become. For example, to come up with an idea, when you start practicing these kinds of things, you might have to make a few sort of logical leaps to come up to the conclusion, right? But then while practicing it enough, it's almost like your body starts to just automatically make those decisions. And that's because your brain finds quicker pathways to that destination, right? It's probably a very rudimentary way of explaining it, but as far as I understand it, that's kind of how things work. If there's a neuroscientist watching this, probably not, but if there is, please correct me in the comments. But it's also the reason why when we learn a musical instrument, for example, when we start playing it, you have to think, oh, what note must I press? What note must I press? And then as you become better at it, you just play. You don't have to think. Your body almost just does the stuff automatically, right? It doesn't, because your body can't do those things automatically. Your brain is involved in every action. But it's just that process from beginning to end decision becomes much more fluid, right? And that's the idea of kind of exercising your brain. So I guess that leads me to another point that I wanted to talk about, is how important it is to at least attempt to learn a musical instrument. Maybe not to be a virtuoso or anything like that, but again, just to make these new discoveries, right? To wire these synapses in your brain in different ways. And so that when you are confronted with a different type of musical conundrum, you can come up with a different type of result, right? So anything, it doesn't even have to be piano or drums or something like that, although those will probably help you the most in terms of DAW production, right? Learning to play the keys, having a MIDI controller, that's obviously something good. But I mean, any musical instrument will just help develop your musical skills, right? And it'll speed up the process of decision making, and things will feel more automatic. And so that concept of speeding up the decision making, making things more automatic, segues to my next point, right? About sample libraries. And one of the reasons why I actually don't use stuff like Splice is because the moment you kind of open up a massive sample library, or you open up Splice and you start cycling through all of those samples, right? You're already doing your creativity a disservice, because you're shifting from creative mode into analytical mode. And it's really hard to kind of shift back into creative mode once we've started that kind of analytical cycle, right? So I guess the best way of doing this is to just keep your sample library really small. Find a few sample libraries that you can really rely on, like kicks and drums and that kind of thing, and a couple of extra like vocal things. And keep that kind of stuff small, because the amount of time that it takes to come to those decisions is really important for your creativity. You can kind of think of it like a massive sort of snowball avalanching down the mountain, right? As it kind of gains momentum, it becomes more powerful, right? But the moment it stops, it's no longer powerful, right? The moment that whole avalanche has come to a halt, it's no longer an avalanche. Now it's just snow, right? So kind of think of it like that. Like when you halt the creative process to start searching through sample libraries and to start thinking too much, that can often be a disservice to your creativity. So that doesn't mean don't ever do it while you're producing music. Have different sort of zones, different mindsets that you use. When you're being creative, when you're in the beginning stages of your track, don't be too analytical. When you move on to the mixing and mastering and further sort of production of your track, shift over to the analytical stage. Because then also what happens is once you're in that analytical stage, that you're less likely to get back into the creative stage and start making destructive decisions that might alter the thing too much. So it's a good idea to have these very firm mindsets that you work in, creative, analytical, because, you know, it can be, once you start blurring those boundaries, what tends to happen is you open a track, let it loop for hours. You're not sure whether you want to work on it or whether you want to fine tune it, right? But being clear about that in your own head is a very good thing to do when you're trying to be more, whatever it is, creative or productive. So the last concept that I want to talk about today is, I guess, kind of inspired more by, actually two things, but the whole idea of it is inspired by something that you'll often hear traditional art teachers and illustrators and painters talk about. And that's the concept of creating the form first and then fine-tuning the function. So what I mean by that is a sort of technique that a lot of creative, like traditional artists, painters, drawers, illustrators, that kind of thing use when they're practicing, is they will, with different mediums, of course, maybe just create a few blobs on a piece of paper without thinking about what that blob might be, to just let the paintbrush do the work, right? And then come back and start to outline those blobs and create a function for that blob. It's a weird description, I guess, but the idea there is to, you know, often when we're in that productive mode, we're thinking like, now this track needs a snare drum. Now I need to make a snare drum. What are the processes that I go through to make a snare drum? But to truly unlock that sort of creative mentality, it's a good idea to kind of flip that on its head, right? Just get into making the thing and then look at it from an outside perspective and be like, what is this? Does it sound like a snare? Does it sound like a kick? Does it sound like a synth? Because what then tends to happen is you tend to find new ways of creating the same things. And in that way, the results will be slightly different, right? So if we make a kick drum in a different way, the results will be slightly different. And the example that I actually want to bring up here is actually a truly interesting one. I don't think I've actually spoken about this in a video before, perhaps a few times on a live stream, but it's not actually a unique concept. This is something that I actually picked up, but I picked it up, or I was inspired by a creator by the name of Astrobear. I'll also try to remember to post the link in the description. So the idea here is to use something like just a transient, and then something like disperser, which is a stack of all-pass filters, to create a kick drum. So I guess the idea here is to not think what is the result going to be, and think how can we experiment in different ways, look at the result and be like, oh, that sounds like a kick drum. let's use it as a kick drum, right? So Bitwig has a device called test tone, which essentially just generates a test tone, but it's got a mode here called Dirac, which basically just generates little clicks at the frequency that you dial in. I believe that's just a little DC offset. It's not white noise or anything. It's just a little bit of voltage that spikes through. So let's open up Kilohertz Disperser. If we max out the amount and then send that test tone Dirac signal through here, it's pretty crazy. It sounds kind of like a kick drum, right? So we can take it a bit further with some processing, right? What I end up doing with this kind of thing is I'll put Kilohertz Transient Shaper and remove some of the attack. And then add another disperser. So here what we can do is we can add a tool just to increase the volume. How's that, right? I'm pretty sure that that concept would have never come up with like somebody thinking like, I want to make a kick drum, I'm going to do it this way, right? I'm sure this came up with people just experimenting with test tones and running test tones through effects and seeing what they will do and being like, oh, that sounds kind of like a kick drum. Let's use that, right? We can even process it even further. Let's put in some peak limiter and saturator. That about sums up this video. I hope you guys enjoyed that. Let me know what you think in the comments. As always, if you haven't yet, please consider hitting that like button. If you want to support me, check out my Patreon down below. I've also got a store where you can buy a bunch of sample packs and presets and that kind of thing. I know that's kind of counterintuitive to one of the things I said in this video. I'm not forcing you, so that's up to you. You know what I mean? So yeah. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed that. Let me know your thoughts in the comments and see you guys next time. Cheers.